How many of you get your food from grocery stores? Wow. How many of you get your food from the restaurants? Thank you. Personally, now, currently, as we speak, I actually get my food most of the time from the restaurants. But that is a break. It's actually an intergenerational break from what I was first introduced to by a very courageous, wise, and hardworking woman, my grandmother. At the age of 7, my grandmom woke me up very early one morning. I thought she was waking me up to go and play with the goats and take them for grazing. But this day was actually quite different. She gave me a farming equipment to go to the field with her and farm. My grandmom raised 8 children on an 8-acre farm. She inherited that 8-acre farm from my great-grandfather. And my great-grandfather inherited that from his own grandfather. So this is a land that has been passed down from one generation to the next. On that one morning, I didn't know what I was being introduced to. But when I arrived on the field, I actually discovered what my grandmother wanted to do. She wanted to pass down the knowledge that she was passed down. But a 7-year-old mind did not see that. For me, South Sudan, where I come from, the heat is really too high. In a Canadian perspective, think about the worst winter you have ever experienced. That's how the heat is. So when my grandmother woke me up very early in the morning, going to the field, she gave me a cup of seeds to go and plant, and she gave me a farming equipment, and she told me, this is what you do. She created a small circle, and she said, this is your circle. You have to farm that before we leave here today. I thought that was a simple task that I would do quickly, and then I would run off and go play. But it actually turned out to be really difficult because it's very methodical. You have to create a hole, put the seed of a peanut into it, and then cover it, and then make sure you're not tampering with any other living organisms on that soil. So you have to treat carefully. Meanwhile, the sun is hitting on you. Within 1 hour, I was already getting sweaty. And the heat was becoming too much. I told my grandmother I want to leave the farm and I would like to go to the shed. She told me, keep on. So I tried to keep on, and it was really difficult to continue. So when I decided to cheat my way out of the farm, when she looked away, I took those peanut seeds and actually ate them. And then when she came back, I told my grandmother, I'm sorry, the seeds are over. She told me, just give me 5 minutes. She ran to the house, got the seeds, brought another full cup, and she told me, you have to finish that. Well, I have argued with my grandmother before, so I knew this was not an argument that I will ever win. So I continued on to do it. When days went on, I actually discovered that it was actually very interesting to be on the field with my grandmother because it was a way for her to teach me things that I didn't have a chance to learn before. She taught me to hope and to trust the process, that you can actually put something in the soil and hope for months that something will come out of it. My grandmother was a widow, and she raised 8 children. My mother was the second child. Alone on that farm, and she kept telling me, if you are to go far, look at the lizard. Mind you, the heat that I'm talking about is too high. Not even animals can persevere. But the lizard has to find something to eat. So when it is really hot, that is actually the time when also the insects know that the lizards will not come out of the shade to come and eat them. There is wisdom everywhere, even in nature. But the lizard knows that in order to live, that begins with the pain. And so the lizard will take charge and go through the heat to go and pick the insect and come back and enjoy the fruit of its labor in the shade. And my grandmother told me, look at that lizard, look at how it is resting. After it has taken its own food, that's how you should live. These were lessons that were to live with me beyond the farm. When I was 10, I decided I wanted to take an experiment and move over the farm and start a business. But my grandmother, being a courageous woman, she supported my idea. I ventured out with 4 other boys to go and pick mangoes at a town that is 8 hours on foot away from our household. I went, slept on the way with these kids, came back the following day, slept on the way again, and arrived home to sell the mangoes, and I started my first trade business. This was when I was 10. But when I was 11, a really devastating famine hit our region. Some of you who may not know the history of Sudan, it's a country that has gone through decades of war. And that war cut off the region that I came from. The international community was really late to respond to the famine that happened. And at 11 years old, I saw my first death. Not out of a bullet, but out of hunger, starvation. I woke up one morning. I was going to the local market to open my trade business. And I met a man on the street. He was sitting there. I thought he would wake up. When I came, his hand was reaching out for me, asking for help. I thought I would come and pull him, but when I came and touched his hand, he passed out. That was the most devastating thing that I have ever experienced in my life. So when I came back from the market, I thought about it more, and I actually found out that even people who had money at that particular time didn't have food to eat, because money cannot buy food. There is none in the market. So after this famine, I decided to change my business model. I decided to actually do barter trade with the local farmers the following year. I would buy commodities, go to remote places, give them some basic commodities that they need, and exchange that with crops, grains, and put it in stores. And when the next season came, hunger was far away from my household. It was also far away from where I was. When I was 15, my business was actually thriving, and my family was happy. But then, I was faced with challenges that every other young person faces, especially a young boy in a war-torn country. I was faced head-on with the challenge of being recruited into the militia group to be a child soldier. At this point, I had started going to school as I ran my business on the side. When this challenge hit me, the future that I wanted was in jeopardy. And I decided it was actually wise for me to leave the country and flee, find somewhere safe where I would go to school without worrying about bullets or bombs. I seek the blessing of my grandmother. It was so difficult for her to understand. But she also knew that she couldn't keep me safe in the neighborhood. And so I used my business money. I liquidated my all assets, and I decided to use that money to get out of the country. It was not until when I got out of the country that I knew some of the lessons that I learned while I was on the farm were actually quite useful. I discovered on the journey, the torturous journey that I went on, that took more than 7 days on a truck, holding on to the rims of the truck. I was too young at this point that I could not even reach the rims of the truck. By the time I arrived at my destination, all my hands were bruised. The car broke down on the way. We spent 3 days not knowing whether we will leave, whether we will be killed by local militia groups, or I would actually end up joining the militia group that I was trying to run away from. But the persistence, the grit, and some of the seeds that were actually planted in me by my grandmother saved me to the end. Those seeds also saved me to persevere the hardships in the refugee camp. Those seeds, by the way, also saved me to withstand the devastating cold of Canada. 4 years ago, and 7 months and 7 days today, I arrived here in Canada through a scholarship program, coming to University of Toronto. This was a dream come true for me. It was a dream come true for my grandmother. It was a dream come true for my community. It was a dream come true for my country and for the world. Personally, my inner child was actually quite joyous when I arrived here, because growing up, I watched some movies. I've also watched videos of music, people like Drake, and I was really happy to be in a city where all this originates from. One thing was something that was really exciting for me, that I was looking forward to, was the food that was highly advertised in the movies. Hamburger, it sounds so cool. I would ask, like, why am I not eating a hamburger? Like, it sounds so nice. And I arrived here, and the first thing I wanted was to get hamburger. But unfortunately, I arrived during winter time. And at this point, I wanted to go and find a hamburger, but I couldn't. I could only find Popeyes. That was the only thing that I had access to. I ate that for a few days until I almost became sick. Within a few weeks, I was fed up with Canadian food. 2 years forward, I got an opportunity to go back to Africa, to Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, to do a research there. And I was lucky. I found myself really happy. I wanted to eat an African food again. Arriving in Ghana, my friends wanted to take me to their best restaurant. Do you know where they took me to? KFC. Now, some of you would be wondering, hamburger actually costs 1,500 liters of water to produce. The meat that we eat here in Canada, 1 kilogram, costs 15,000 liters of water. Mind you, in a place like South Sudan, someone is forced to either choose between eating or drinking that 1 liter of water because there is no water. My grandmother that I told you about, that introduced me to farming, has been faced by one difficult issue: desertification and land degradation, emanating from the climate change, extreme drought, flooding. Every minute, 23 acres of land are lost. Now we know in the next 3 decades, our world is going to be adding 3 more billion people. How are we going to feed them? I know for firsthand that the difference between prosperity and poverty is water, as put forward by Kalpanati. These are issues that we have to think about, because one thing that I should warn you about is that in the next 3 decades, your grocery stores may actually be empty, and that will be the beginning of disaster that Canadians and North Americans will actually be unprepared for. Because with this level of land degradation that is happening, farmers are being pushed out. In Africa, some of those farmers end up at the seabeds of the Mediterranean Sea, trying to flee from hopelessness and despair. But we sit on technologies. I'm using this technology, clicking away at you. If we combine the power of technology and the power of traditional knowledge from my grandmother, and other local people that have the wealth of knowledge that they have had for last centuries, we will create a prosperous, peaceful, and a regenerative future. This is the work that I do at Rainmaker Enterprise, trying to merge my worlds so that I can enjoy the movies that I used to enjoy as a kid, and also still enjoy the traditional knowledge that was passed down to me by my grandmother. And also to invite you along with me to learn some of this valuable wisdom that were passed down. It should be a collaboration between us and them. It's not imposing what we know, because what we know, our eating habits, are actually the processes that lead to the devastation that is happening elsewhere. The way we eat influence how others produce. So if we must reimagine a regenerative future, it must begin with how we eat. How many of you appreciate the food that you get on your table every day? Thank you. That food is a direct sweat of someone that you will never have a chance to see. So can we all invest in local solutions that empower the local people that sweat so hard to produce the food that we eat that we will never meet? This is what we are trying to do. And I invite you along to also do the same. Thank you.